The night air was crisp, as Draco and Hermione stepped beyond the iron gates of Malfoy Manor. The towering estate loomed behind them, its dark silhouette a haunting reminder of the past Draco had just left behind. The finality of his father's words echoed in his mind. "You are no longer my son." Draco let out a slow breath, staring at the path ahead. He had known this moment was coming, had prepared himself for it. And yet, the weight of it pressed down on him in a way he hadn't expected. Hermione squeezed his hand. "Draco, are you okay?" He turned to her, forcing a smirk. "Well, I guess I'm an orphan now." She frowned. "Draco." His smirk faded. He knew she saw right through him. "I'll be fine," he said after a moment, quieter this time. "It's not like I ever really had a father, not in the way that mattered." Hermione's heart ached for him. She knew what Lucius had done, how he had shaped Draco's life through manipulation and pressure. And now, he had cast him aside without hesitation. But if Lucius thought he could break Draco this way, he was wrong. "You're not alone," she said firmly. "You still have me. You still have people who care about you." Draco looked at her, searching her face. The sincerity in her eyes made his chest tighten. "I know." They apparated back to Hogwarts, landing just outside the castle gates. The grounds were quiet, the stars above a stark contrast to the storm that had just unraveled in Draco's life. As they walked toward the castle, Hermione finally spoke. "You don't regret it, do you?" Draco shook his head. "No. He made the choice for me a long time ago. Tonight just made it official." She studied him for a moment before linking her arm through his. "Then let's go inside. You're home now." For the first time, Draco realized she was right. Hogwarts wasn't just a school anymore. It was where he truly belonged. The next morning, the entire school was buzzing with the news. The Daily Prophet had already picked up the story. Lucius Malfoy disowning his only son was front-page material. Draco had expected whispers, but this was something else entirely. As he walked into the Great Hall with Hermione, the conversations quieted. Heads turned. Eyes followed him. Some expressions were sympathetic, others curious, and a few, mostly Slytherins, looked downright hostile. Pansy Parkinson sneered as he passed. "So much for family loyalty, Malfoy." Draco didn't even glance at her. "So much for originality, Parkinson." Hermione stifled a laugh as they took their seats at the Gryffindor table. Ron leaned over. "You all right, mate?" Draco quirked an eyebrow. "Since when do you care?" Ron shrugged. "Since you stopped being a git," Harry smirked. "Mostly." Draco rolled his eyes, but there was no real annoyance behind it. "Well, don't get used to it," Ginny grinned. "Too late." As breakfast went on, Hermione noticed Draco seemed more at ease, despite everything that had happened. Maybe, just maybe, he was finally finding his place. But as she took a sip of pumpkin juice, a new Daily Prophet headline caught her eye, making her blood run cold. "Lucius Malfoy aligns with high-ranking officials. Whispers of a new political power shift in the wizarding world." Hermione exchanged a glance with Draco. Lucius wasn't done yet. And neither were they. The weight of the Daily Prophet felt heavier in Hermione's hands as she read through the article. The headline had been alarming enough, but the details were worse. Lucius Malfoy, despite the recent controversies surrounding his disownment of his only son, has been seen in closed-door meetings with high-ranking officials at the Ministry of Magic. Sources claim Malfoy is leveraging his wealth and influence to push for new reforms. Ones that could significantly alter the structure of magical law enforcement and blood status policies. Hermione's grip tightened around the paper. He's not just cutting Draco off. He's repositioning himself, preparing for something bigger. Draco took the paper from her hands, scanning the lines. His expression darkened. "This isn't just about me. He's using my betrayal as fuel. He'll claim that he's trying to preserve the integrity of wizarding traditions or some rubbish like that." Harry frowned. "If Malfoy's involved, that means other former Death Eaters probably are too. They won't just sit back and let the world change around them." Ron scowled. "Can't they just give it a rest? We already fought one war." Luna, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "Some people don't know how to exist without control. If they lose it, they'll do anything to take it back." Draco tossed the paper onto the table. We need to figure out exactly what he's planning. My father doesn't make moves unless he knows they'll work. Hermione nodded, already formulating a plan. We need to get inside those ministry meetings, find out what he's really up to. Harry exhaled. That's easier said than done. You don't just waltz into a high-security meeting. Draco smirked. Maybe you don't. The group exchanged glances. Ron sighed. Oh, bloody hell, we're actually doing this, aren't we? Hermione smiled slightly. Looks like it. That evening, Hermione and Draco sat in the room of requirement, surrounded by old ministry records. Hermione had managed to retrieve from the library's restricted section. They pored over political documents, tracing patterns in Lucius's past dealings. Draco leaned back, rubbing his temples. There has to be a connection. My father doesn't make deals unless he gets something in return. Hermione chewed her lip. What if he's not just securing power for himself? Draco looked at her. Go on. She hesitated. What if he's setting the stage for something, or someone else? He wouldn't risk this much unless he had an end goal in mind. Draco's jaw tightened. You think he's preparing for a bigger shift in power? Hermione nodded. And if we don't stop him, we might not be able to undo it later. Draco clenched his fists. His father had already taken so much from him. He wouldn't let Lucius manipulate the wizarding world into another crisis, not this time. We need to find out who he's working with, Draco said firmly, before it's too late. Hermione met his gaze, determination burning in her eyes. Then let's get to work. The room of requirement had transformed into a war room of sorts, filled with stacks of parchment, old copies of the Daily Prophet, and ministry records Hermione had retrieved. Maps of the Ministry of Magic and key political figures were pinned to a conjured board, lines drawn between them in red ink. Draco paced the room, his expression tense. We know my father is making a move, but we're still missing a crucial piece. Who is backing him? Hermione sat cross-legged on the floor, scanning through a report. It's not just about backing. Lucius wouldn't make a move unless he was sure it would succeed. He's not a risk-taker unless he knows the odds are in his favor. Harry, who had just arrived with Ron, crossed his arms. So, what's his angle? The Ministry is still trying to clean up after the war. There's no way they'd allow another pure-blood supremacy movement to gain traction. Draco smirked bitterly. You're assuming they even realize what's happening, Ron groaned. Great, another corrupt Ministry plot. Didn't we just fix this? Hermione stood and pointed to the board. I went through the latest political shifts. Kingsley has been focusing on rebuilding trust, but that's left gaps for people like Lucius to take advantage of. The laws protecting former Death Eaters from bias also protect them from scrutiny. Harry frowned. That means Lucius is using the same system meant to reform society to manipulate it from within. Draco exhaled sharply. It's classic Malfoy strategy. Never fight the system head-on, just bend it until it works in your favor. Hermione tapped a document. And here's where it gets worse. I found a record of recent ministry hires, high-level appointments that weren't exactly publicized. Draco leaned over her shoulder, scanning the names, his eyes widened. No, this can't be right. Hermione met his gaze. It is. Harry stepped forward. What? Who? Draco clenched his jaw. Theodore Knott's father. Ron's eyes widened. Knott? As in the Death Eater who was practically Voldemort's accountant? Hermione nodded grimly. The same. He's been given a quiet but powerful position in the Department of International Magical Cooperation. That means he has access to global allies. Draco cursed under his breath. If Knott Sr. is involved, then this isn't just about politics. This is about resources, influence, and... He broke off, realization dawning. Harry narrowed his eyes. And what? Draco turned to Hermione. Who's in charge of the Wizengamot's financial division? Hermione immediately flipped through her notes. When she found the name, she paled. Damocles Row. Ron groaned. Brilliant, another old Death Eater family. Draco ran a hand through his hair. That's it. My father's not just trying to regain power, he's trying to rewrite the system from the inside. Harry's jaw tightened. If we don't stop this now, we're looking at a slow-moving takeover, one that no one will even see coming until it's too late. Hermione squared her shoulders. Then we have to act fast. Draco met her gaze, a steely determination in his eyes. Then let's bring them down before they even see us coming. The weight of their discovery hung in the air as the group processed the implications. Lucius Malfoy, Theodore Nott Sr., and Damocles Roll, three powerful figures, each embedded within different sectors of the ministry, working toward a goal no one had seen coming. Hermione exhaled sharply. We need evidence. If we go to Kingsley with speculation, it won't be enough. They'll dismiss us as paranoid. Draco nodded, running a hand through his hair. My father's careful. If he's planning something on this scale, he won't leave a paper trail. He'll use back channels, personal networks, and off-the-record meetings. Ron frowned. So what do we do? Sit around and wait for him to slip up? Harry leaned forward. No, we get ahead of him. Hermione's brow furrowed. How? Harry met Draco's gaze. We go inside. Draco narrowed his eyes. Inside where, Potter? The ministry. Silence. Then Ron let out a sharp laugh. Oh great, because sneaking into the most heavily secured place in the wizarding world went so well last time. Harry ignored him. Think about it. We already know they're using their positions to move things around. But that means there have to be internal records. Hidden, maybe, but there. If we can get access to their communication logs, meeting schedules, anything. Hermione's eyes lit up with understanding. We can prove they're conspiring. Draco crossed his arms. And how exactly do you plan on getting inside without getting thrown into Azkaban? Harry smirked. Same way we did last time. Polyjuice potion. Draco sighed. Of course, because breaking a dozen ministry laws is our specialty. Ron groaned. I hate that potion. Hermione ignored them, already deep in thought. We'll need hair samples from the right people, ministry workers, ones with access but not too high profile. We also need a plan for extracting the information and getting out before anyone realizes something's wrong. Draco studied her, impressed by how quickly her mind was moving. We'll also need a distraction. My father will have eyes everywhere. Harry nodded. Then we divide and conquer. One team goes in for the records. The other keeps the ministry occupied. Ron raised an eyebrow. And how exactly are we supposed to occupy an entire government building? Draco smirked. I have a few ideas. The plan came together over the next few days. Hermione used her prefect connections to subtly gather information about ministry personnel. Luna managed to slip into the Daily Prophet's archives and pull older reports on Lucius's political dealings. Ginny worked with the twins, who, despite having gone legitimate with their shop, still had a knack for organized chaos. And Draco? Draco did what he did best. He played the game. With careful wording and a bit of Malfoy charm, he reached out to old Slytherin connections, dropping hints about an interest in his father's affairs. A casual conversation here, a seemingly harmless inquiry there. Soon, he had a list of ministry officials who frequently met with Lucius. It was dangerous. If his father caught wind of what he was doing, the consequences would be dire. But Draco wasn't the same person he had been a year ago. He was done living in his father's shadow. Finally, everything was set. One last meeting in the room of requirement. Hermione rolled out a parchment detailing their plan. Harry, Ron, and I will go in disguised as ministry workers and head for the records department. Draco leaned against the wall, arms crossed. And I'll be making sure no one's watching you too closely. Ron raised an eyebrow. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Draco smirked. By being the perfect distraction. Harry hesitated. Draco, if you get caught, I won't. His voice was firm. I know how my father operates. If I play my part right, he won't suspect a thing. Hermione watched him carefully, concern flickering in her eyes. Just be careful. Draco met her gaze, softer this time. I will. Harry exhaled. All right then, we do this tomorrow night. Ron groaned. Brilliant. Another completely illegal mission. Draco smirked. Excited, Weasley? Ron scowled. Not even a little. Hermione rolled up the parchment. Then let's get some rest. Tomorrow, we bring Lucius Malfoy down. Draco smirked, but there was a glint of something darker in his eyes. Tomorrow, he finally finished what his father started. The cold night air wrapped around Draco as he stood outside the Ministry of Magic. his heart hammering against his ribs. He adjusted the cuffs of his robes, playing the part of the unbothered heir, cool, composed, untouchable. But inside, he was anything but. Tonight, everything had to go perfectly. A few feet away, Hermione, Harry, and Ron lingered in the shadows, the effects of the polyjuice potion settling in. Their disguises were impeccable. Low-ranking ministry employees with just enough clearance to slip into the records department unnoticed. "All right," Hermione whispered. "Once we're inside, we'll have 15 minutes, maybe less, before someone realizes something's off." Harry nodded. "We grab whatever we can and get out. No risks." Ron sighed. "Yeah, because this whole plan isn't one giant risk." Draco rolled his eyes. "Relax, Weasley. I'll make sure no one notices you're missing." Hermione hesitated. "Draco, if something goes wrong..." "It won't." He cut her off, his voice sharp. He had to believe that. She frowned but didn't push. "All right, let's move." With a final glance between them, the trio disappeared into the ministry's entrance. Draco exhaled slowly, then squared his shoulders and strode toward the opposite entrance. It was time for his part of the plan. The grand hall of the ministry was bustling, but Draco navigated it effortlessly. Every glance he received was laced with curiosity. After all, he was still Draco Malfoy, the son of Lucius Malfoy, and his presence anywhere sparked whispers, which was exactly what he wanted. "Draco," a familiar voice drawled from behind. He turned, forcing a smirk as he faced Theodore Nott. "Theo," he greeted smoothly. "Didn't expect to see you here." Theo studied him with sharp eyes. "I could say the same. Your father isn't exactly thrilled with you right now." Draco chuckled, feigning indifference. "That's an understatement." He took a step closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Between you and me, I think he's making a mistake." Theo raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" Draco leaned in, voice dripping with calculated curiosity. "You really think he's going to pull all this off without me? I am a Malfoy after all. My father might be stubborn, but he knows I'm valuable." Theo regarded him for a long moment. Then, with a smirk, he gestured for Draco to follow. "Come on, then," Theo said. "Let's see if you really belong in the fold." Draco swallowed hard, keeping his expression neutral. He had just secured himself a way in. Now, he just had to survive it. Meanwhile, deep inside the ministry, Hermione, Harry, and Ron moved quickly through the archives. Shelves of classified records towered around them, filled with names, agreements, and hidden truths. "We don't have time to search through everything," Hermione whispered urgently. "Look for anything with Lucius Malfoy's name, or Theodore Nott's." Ron rifled through a set of parchments. "Here, financial transactions. Some of these names look familiar." Hermione snatched the papers from his hands, her eyes widening. "These aren't just personal accounts. These are bribes." Harry cursed under his breath. "If we can get this out, we can expose them." Suddenly, footsteps echoed down the hall. Ron's face went pale. We've got company." Hermione stuffed the documents into her bag. "Time to go." Harry grabbed Ron's arm. "Back entrance? Now." The three of them darted into the shadows, slipping away just as two ministry guards entered the archive room. They had what they needed. Now, they just had to get out alive. Draco followed Theo into a private meeting chamber, his pulse quickening as he spotted the figures inside. Lucius Malfoy stood at the head of the table, his piercing gaze locking onto Draco the moment he entered. Beside him sat Damocles Roll and a few other powerful figures, men who had survived the war with their influence intact. Draco forced a smirk. "Father?" he greeted smoothly. "Miss me?" Lucius studied him for a long moment before speaking. "Let's see if you're still worthy of the Malfoy name." Draco's stomach twisted, but he kept his expression cool. He had just stepped into the lion's den, and there was no turning back now. Draco stood tall under his father's cold gaze, his heart pounding beneath his composed exterior. The chamber was filled with men who could destroy him with a single word. If they suspected he was playing them, he wouldn't leave the room unscathed. Lucius's lips curled into a faint smirk. "So, you finally decided to stop sulking and rejoin your family's cause?" Draco forced a smirk of his own. "I wouldn't call it sulking. Just observing." He walked slowly toward the table, deliberately exuding confidence. And from what I've observed, you're building something impressive. His eyes flickered toward Roll. Something powerful. Roll leaned forward, his sharp gaze analyzing Draco. Flattery won't earn you a seat at this table, Malfoy. Draco shrugged. Flattery isn't my intention. I simply recognize power when I see it. He turned his gaze back to his father, and I think we both know that I could be an asset. Lucius tapped his fingers against the table. An asset, he mused. And what exactly do you think you have to offer? Draco's mind raced. He needed to give them something that would make them believe he was on their side. He leaned in slightly. Access, he said simply. To people you don't have. Lucius's expression remained unreadable. Be specific. Draco exhaled as if debating whether to reveal something. Then he spoke carefully. There are students at Hogwarts, pure-blood families with influence, ones who still respect the old ways but are too afraid to align themselves openly. He met his father's gaze. I can bring them to you. A silence stretched across the room. Then Roll chuckled. He's got his father's cunning, I'll give him that. Lucius tilted his head slightly, studying Draco. Perhaps, but I have my doubts about your loyalty. Draco's stomach tightened, but he didn't let it show. If I wasn't loyal, I wouldn't be here. Lucius's eyes darkened. Then prove it. Draco's pulse spiked. How? His father's lips curled into a cruel smirk. You'll see soon enough. Draco forced himself to smirk back, even as dread crept into his gut. Whatever test Lucius had in mind, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to like it. Meanwhile, Hermione, Harry, and Ron slipped out of the Ministry, moving through the shadows of Diagon Alley before apparating back to the Room of Requirement. The second they arrived, Hermione wasted no time pulling the stolen documents from her bag. This is it, she breathed, spreading them out on the table. Bank statements, bribes, secret meetings, everything we need to expose them. Harry clenched his jaw. Then we take this to Kingsley. Ron frowned. What about Draco? He's still in there. Hermione bit her lip. We can't just leave him. Harry exhaled sharply. We don't have a choice. We can't risk everything on a rescue mission. Not yet. Hermione's fists clenched. Then we need to move fast. Ron looked between them. Before Draco runs out of time, a heavy silence settled between them. Because they all knew, if Draco was caught, he wouldn't get a second chance. Draco sat in tense silence as the chamber doors sealed shut behind him. Whatever test his father had in mind, it was about to begin. Lucius rose from his seat and paced slowly around the table. His polished cane tapped against the floor with each deliberate step. You claim to be loyal, Draco, he mused. But words mean nothing without action. Draco kept his expression neutral. And what action do you require? Lucius stopped beside him, a smirk curling his lips, a demonstration. Roll leaned forward, his eyes glinting with amusement. We have a loose end that needs to be taken care of. Draco's blood turned to ice. Not Senior smirked. You remember Edgar Greaves, don't you? The Ministry official who was considering our offer but got cold feet? Draco nodded stiffly. He had heard the name before, an undersecretary in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, someone his father had likely tried to bribe or coerce. Lucius tilted his head. He's been a problem. Spreading rumors, sniffing around places he shouldn't. We need to remind him what happens when people betray their own. Draco's stomach churned. Are you suggesting I? He trailed off, hoping, praying, that he had misunderstood. Roll chuckled darkly. What's the matter? You were eager to prove yourself a moment ago. Lucius studied his son closely, his cold gray eyes gleaming with something unreadable. Edgar Greaves needs to be silenced, and you, Draco, will be the one to do it. Draco's mind raced. This was worse than he had expected. He had thought they'd ask him to recruit someone, steal something, maybe even bring to a restricted area. But this, his father was asking him to cross a line that could never be uncrossed. For a brief, horrible moment, Draco wondered if Lucius knew the truth, that Draco wasn't truly on his side, that this was a test designed to root out his disloyalty. He couldn't refuse outright. That would be suicide. But he also couldn't do it, so he did the only thing he could. He played for time. Draco leaned back in his chair, forcing an air of casual confidence. Killing a ministry official is risky, he said smoothly. You really want that kind of attention right now? Lucius arched a brow. You have a better suggestion? Draco feigned thoughtfulness, even as his heartbeat pounded in his ears. If you want to send a message, there are other ways. Roll scoffed. We don't need subtlety, we need results. Draco met his father's gaze. I can handle it, but not in a way that puts all of us at risk. Lucius studied him for a long moment, and Draco forced himself to remain still. Finally, his father nodded slightly. You have 24 hours, Lucius said. If Edgar Greaves is still a problem by then, we'll handle things ourselves. Draco inclined his head, though his mind was already reeling. He had 24 hours to find a way out of this, and if he failed, someone would die, either Edgar Greaves or Draco himself. Back at Hogwarts, Hermione was pacing furiously in the room of requirement. We need to act now. Harry frowned. We don't even know what they're making Draco do. Ron sighed. We know one thing. Whatever it is, it's bad. Luna, who had been quietly observing from the corner, spoke up. Maybe we should ask someone who knows more about Lucius Malfoy's plans. Harry frowned. And who exactly would that be? Luna smiled dreamily. Why, Lucius Malfoy himself, of course. Hermione stopped pacing. Luna, that's... She paused, blinking as the idea sank in. Luna tilted her head. If he's in the ministry right now, he's probably using private flu calls. All we need to do is intercept one. Harry exchanged glances with Hermione and Ron. It was risky. It was reckless. But it might just work. Ron exhaled. Well, if we're going to eavesdrop on a Death Eater, we'd better do it quickly. Hermione nodded, her eyes blazing with determination. Then let's get to work. They had one night to find out what Draco was up against, and hopefully, to save him from a choice he couldn't take back. Draco stepped out of the chamber with measured steps, keeping his posture straight even as his insides twisted with unease. The moment he was out of sight, he exhaled shakily, pressing a hand against the cold stone wall. He had bought himself 24 hours, but that was barely enough time to think, let alone find a solution. He needed to act fast. First, he had to find Edgar Greaves. Draco ducked into a quiet corridor, pulling out a small enchanted mirror, the same one Hermione had given him for emergencies. He hesitated for only a second before whispering, Hermione. The mirror remained dark for a moment before her face flickered into view. The second she saw him, her brows furrowed. Draco. What happened? He kept his voice low. I don't have time to explain everything. My father and his lot want me to eliminate a ministry official, Edgar Greaves. I stalled them, but I only have until tomorrow. Hermione paled. Eliminate? Draco clenched his jaw. I need to find him first. Hermione's mind was already working at lightning speed. All right, give me a few minutes. She turned away, speaking quickly to someone on her side. Draco caught glimpses of Harry and Ron behind her, looking equally alarmed. A minute later, she was back. He's in his home just outside London, probably under heavy security if he suspects danger. Draco nodded sharply. Then I need you to get him somewhere safe. Can you do that? She hesitated. You're asking us to interfere with an active ministry official? Draco gave her a pointed look. It's either that or he dies. Hermione exhaled. Fine, we'll figure something out, but what about you? Draco smirked, though it didn't reach his eyes. I'll deal with my father. Her face remained tense, but she nodded. Be careful. Draco ended the connection and took a steadying breath. One part of the plan was in motion. Now, he needed to figure out how to convince his father that Greaves was no longer a problem, without actually killing him. At Hogwarts, Hermione turned to Harry and Ron, urgency in her voice. We need to get Greaves out of his home now. Harry was already pulling out his invisibility cloak. Then let's go. Ron groaned. I just know we're going to regret this. But they all knew there was no other option. Within minutes, they had apparated outside Greaves' home, concealed by disillusionment charms. The house was modest, but the wards surrounding it pulsed with defensive magic. Hermione scanned the area. We can't break through without setting off alarms. We need another way. Ron pulled out a handful of extendable ears. We could try talking to him first. Maybe he'll listen. Harry grimaced. Or maybe he'll hex first and ask questions later. But they didn't have time for better ideas. Carefully, Hermione pulled out her wand and whispered a charm to amplify their voices without making them loud enough to alert the entire neighborhood. "Edgar Greaves," she said firmly, "we know you're in danger. Let us help you." There was a long silence. Then the front door creaked open just an inch. A sharp voice called out, "Who are you?" Harry took a step closer. "We're not your enemies, but if you stay here, you won't live to see the morning." A tense pause followed. Then the door opened wider, revealing a thin, sharp-featured man with wary eyes. "You have 60 seconds to convince me." Hermione wasted none of them. "Lucius Malfoy and his allies want you dead. Draco Malfoy is being forced to do it. He's stalling, but that won't last." Greaves' expression darkened. "And you expect me to believe that?" Harry pulled a parchment from his robes, one of the documents they had stolen from the Ministry. "We have proof, bribes, corruption, Malfoy's connections. If you come with us, we can protect you and bring them down." Greaves hesitated, his fingers tightening on the doorframe. Then, with a sharp nod, he stepped back. "All right, get me out of here." As they apparated away, Hermione exhaled. One crisis was averted. Now they had to make sure Draco survived his. The next morning, Draco stood before Lucius, his expression carefully neutral. Lucius studied him with sharp, calculating eyes. "Well?" Draco lifted his chin. "Greaves is gone. No one will find him." Lucius arched a brow. "Gone?" Draco nodded. "I found a better solution. The man was a liability, too many eyes on him. Killing him would have caused unnecessary noise." Rolls sneered. "You expect us to believe you handled it cleanly?" Draco met his father's gaze without flinching. "Believe whatever you want, but the problem is solved." Lucius remained silent for a long moment. Then slowly he smirked. "Perhaps you are useful after all." Draco inclined his head. "Always have been." But as he walked away, he knew the truth. He had won this round, but the game was far from over. Draco barely had a moment to breathe before he was summoned again. This time, it wasn't his father waiting for him. It was the Dark Lord himself. He had been expecting this. The moment Lucius had accepted his explanation about Greaves, Draco had known it wouldn't end there. Voldemort wasn't the type to let a task like this simply disappear. As he entered the dimly lit chamber, Draco kept his expression neutral. The Dark Lord sat at the far end, his crimson eyes glinting in the flickering light. Surrounding him were several Death Eaters, his father included. "Draco," Voldemort's voice was barely above a whisper, but it sent a shiver down his spine. "Come closer." Draco obeyed, forcing his steps to remain steady. Voldemort studied him in silence, his pale fingers tapping against the arm of his chair. "Lucius tells me you handled the Greaves matter." Draco bowed his head slightly. "Yes, my lord." The silence that followed was suffocating. "Then, you lie." Draco's breath hitched, but he didn't allow his composure to break. "I—" A flick of Voldemort's hand sent Draco crashing to his knees. Pain seared through him like fire, his nerves screaming in agony. He barely swallowed the cry that threatened to escape. When the curse lifted, he gasped for breath. Voldemort rose, gliding toward him. "You think I wouldn't know?" he hissed. "That I wouldn't sense the deception?" Draco clenched his fists against the cold floor. He had prepared for this moment, but no amount of preparation could steel him against the sheer terror of facing Voldemort's wrath. Still, he couldn't break. "I handled it as cleanly as possible," he rasped. "He's gone. No trace left behind. That's what matters, isn't it?" Voldemort tilted his head, amusement flickering in his eyes. "And yet, I wonder why you chose to spare him." Draco tensed. Lucius's expression remained unreadable, but Draco could feel the weight of his father's stare. The others in the room shifted slightly, their curiosity piqued. If he said the wrong thing here, he was dead. Draco exhaled shakily. "I didn't spare him. I removed him. A corpse brings questions. A disappearance breeds fear." Voldemort studied him for an agonizing moment before chuckling. "Ah, Draco, such tactical thinking. You sound almost like your aunt." Bellatrix cackled from the shadows. Draco's stomach twisted. Voldemort leaned closer. "But tell me, if I were to order your father to verify this? If I were to test your loyalty?" Draco forced himself to meet those crimson eyes. Then he won't find anything. Another long silence. Then Voldemort laughed. The eerie, high-pitched sound sent chills down Draco's spine. Lucius, Voldemort said smoothly, turning away. It seems your son has some potential after all. Lucius inclined his head. He is a Malfoy, my lord. Voldemort's lips curled. Indeed. Let us hope he continues to prove himself. With a flick of his hand, he dismissed them. Draco rose shakily, offering a brief nod before turning to leave. But just as he reached the door, Voldemort's voice slithered through the chamber. Draco. He stopped, not daring to turn around. Do not fail me again. Draco swallowed hard. Yes, my lord. Then he walked out, and he didn't breathe until he was far, far away. At Hogwarts, Hermione paced the room of requirement, her nerves frayed. It had been hours since Draco had last contacted them, and the silence was unbearable. We should have gotten him out before he went back, Ron muttered, arms crossed. This was bloody stupid. He had no choice, Harry countered. If he refused, they would have killed him. Luna, who had been watching quietly, finally spoke. He's alive. Hermione whipped around. How do you know? Luna simply smiled. Because if he wasn't, we'd feel it. Before Hermione could respond, a soft chime echoed from her enchanted mirror. She snatched it up instantly. Draco's face appeared, pale but intact. I'm safe, he said, voice hoarse. For now. Relief flooded through Hermione so strongly she nearly collapsed. What happened? Draco hesitated. Voldemort knows I lied, but he let me live. Ron let out a low whistle. Blimey, Hermione's heart clenched. You can't go back there, Draco, next time. I have to go back, Draco cut in. If I run, he'll know for sure. Hermione clenched her jaw. Harry sighed. Then we need to figure out how to end this, fast. Draco nodded. Agreed. They all knew one thing. Time was running out. Draco didn't return to Malfoy Manor that night. Instead, he found himself wandering the empty streets of London under the cover of disillusionment charms, trying to steady his thoughts. Voldemort had let him live. For now. But he wasn't fooled. The Dark Lord was testing him, waiting for any sign of weakness. His father had said nothing after they left the chamber, but Draco knew Lucius was watching him closely. It wouldn't be long before he was expected to prove himself again. He needed a plan. By the time dawn broke, Draco had made his way back to Hogwarts through one of the hidden passages he and Hermione had mapped out months ago. He entered the room of requirement, already knowing she would be there. Sure enough, Hermione was pacing, her hair disheveled and eyes filled with exhaustion. The moment she saw him, she froze. Draco barely had time to brace himself before she launched forward, throwing her arms around him. You idiot. She breathed against his shoulder. I'm here, he murmured, closing his eyes as he held her. I made it. Harry and Ron were there too, looking relieved but tense. You don't have much time, Harry said grimly. Voldemort's patience isn't endless. Draco exhaled. I know. Ron crossed his arms. So what now? You can't just keep dodging these death orders forever. I won't have to, Draco said, pulling away from Hermione. His expression hardened. We end this. Harry's gaze sharpened. You're saying, Draco nodded, we take down my father, we take down the inner circle, and when we do, Voldemort falls. Hermione inhaled sharply. That's, Draco, that's suicidal? He finished for her. Maybe, but we don't have another choice. Ron muttered something under his breath, rubbing a hand down his face. Bloody hell. Hermione's mind was already racing. You're right. Draco blinked. Wait, what? Hermione turned to Harry. We've been fighting this war reactively, always responding to Voldemort's next move. But what if we make our move first? Harry nodded slowly. We cut off his power from the inside. His influence is only as strong as his followers. If we eliminate their control, we leave him vulnerable. Draco finished. Ron let out a huff. Fine, let's say we do this. How exactly do we take down the most dangerous people in the wizarding world? Draco's jaw tightened. We start with Lucius. A heavy silence followed. Hermione reached for Draco's hand. Are you sure? Draco hesitated for only a moment before squeezing her fingers. He made his choice a long time ago. Harry ran a hand through his hair. All right, then let's do it. Ron groaned. This is such a bad idea. But none of them were backing down. The war was about to change.